welcome to
Bean Stuff.
Well, today we are excited because we have Cole Werfelman. Boy, we are excited to have you. Thank you for coming.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. We've got that little list at the top of just stuff that you're involved in. Holy moly. There's a lot of awesome stuff here. I'm going to read it off.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
South Store, first place at the Caravan Barista Competition. Earth Blend, Rancilio, Golden Bean, Elevator Cafe, and Commons. Buckman's and the SCA. That's an impressive amount.
I've known Cole for a while, and I just wrote those things down. I'm sure there's other things that I don't even know about, and we're going to find those out, I'm sure. But is there anything blaringly that we missed on that list?
No, that's pretty much about everything. Yeah, I'm just kind of all over the board with everything.
So one thing I'm always interested in, when people are in coffee, what did you do before coffee, and how did you get into coffee?
Well, it kind of all started at South Store. I lived really close by, just on a local farm when I was a kid, like 19, and I needed a job, and they needed a waitress, and so I started just bussing tables, and then one day the owner was like, she pointed at the espresso machine, she's like, "You want to learn how to drive this thing?" And I was like, "Sure." And then 8 years later, here I am.
Was there a point when you were driving the machine, and was there a point where you were like, "Ooh, I want to do more of this," or like get into it more? Was there something that like latched onto you?
Actually, when it really latched on was she sent me to the first SCA conference in Seattle. Ooh. And I was like, "Ooh, I get to go see all these things." And I learned about what specialty coffee was, and I met a lot of people and started to do my networking, and I was just like, okay, there's more to this than just driving an espresso machine in your little hometown.
Yeah, it's just, I think all of us here at the table know, but it's just so amazing how much there is to coffee.
Oh, there's so much.
How long did you, or you don't still work at South Store, or you still do sometimes, or?
I visit South Store a lot just because that's kind of like where I got my start, and that's my family.
Yeah.
You know, now that I'm like living and working in Southeast Portland and doing a lot in the like city community side of the coffee industry, like I'm more like honed to there, but like you never forget your roots.
Do you remember those early days on the machine? What part were the parts scary to you, or parts you didn't get, or this is so easy, or you enjoyed this part of it more than that, or on an espresso machine, or other parts of coffee?
Oh yeah, like it used to be like batch brew, like, you know, the drip coffee machines. Like you're like, oh yeah, you just throw it in, it's good. But like now it's like, oh no, you need to dial that in just like your espresso. And you just like, I slowly learned how to refine all my skills to like make every bit of coffee as good as I can.
Ooh, I like
you know?
Yeah.
And it makes a difference. It really does.
Oh, it so does.
Do you use a scale when you pull shots on an espresso machine?
Every time.
Reed, do you use a scale on an espresso machine when you pull shots?
Yeah. You know, I have room to grow. Yeah. I remember as a kid, like coffee was like, oh, this is like a disgusting drink. And maybe at the time I was drinking bad coffee. What was your first impression of coffee? Like, did you like it at first, or was it something you're like,
I like the smell of it.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, like my parents would make it and they're like, oh, here, try a sip. And it's like, oh, this is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And I remember this one trip, my mom took me to California to go visit my aunt. When I was 16, we were on our way to Disneyland, and I was falling asleep in the car, and my aunt was like, this is unacceptable. And we stopped at this little drive-through kiosk, and she turned to me, and she's like, what kind of coffee do you like? I'm like, I don't. And she's just like, I'm going to get you this big 16-ounce caramel latte shenanigan thing.
Yeah.
And I chugged it, like 16-year-old sugar and caramel, whatever. Like, it was great. And we get to Disneyland, and I look in this, like, weird funhouse mirror, and I just remember, like, looking at myself in the mirror going, like, oh, this stuff works. I'm really awake right now. But it wasn't until, like, years later when I got a job at South Store and started working with, like, Caravan and stuff to where, like, oh, wait, it can actually just be good on its own without all these additives.
What's your go-to? Like, if it's a Saturday that you're not working, you're rolling into a coffee shop, you know it's going to be good. What are you getting?
I usually just get a cup of drip. Yeah, I love just a straight black coffee. Like, it's so good. Like, especially, like, because I always pick, like, shops where my friends work at, or, like, I know, like, the roaster or something, and I'm, like, visiting their shop for the first time. Like, just a cup of drip is so good. Like, sometimes I'll splurge and get the espresso, but I don't know. Just a cup of drip for, like, an hour. It's so good.
Sometimes, for me at least, a drip coffee would be kind of like a red wine or something like that. Something you can kind of sip for a while. Sometimes espresso gets a little cold, a little fast.
Well, it's fast, yeah.
Yeah.
If you do splurge to an espresso, there's so many different styles of espresso. Are we talking about a straight espresso, single, double shot? Are we thinking cortada? What would you go for?
Double espresso.
There you go. I wonder if you might say that. One other question. So we're not really going to get stuck on this, but when you drink your double espresso, I know different cultures do it differently. Does it all go down quickly, or do you just sip little sips of it, or how do you go about? This sounds a really odd question when I think about it.
Oh, it's not an odd question though. Like, I always like stir the crema in.
Okay.
Just always stir it in because I don't want straight crema.
Yes.
And then I take a sip, let it cool a little bit, and then I take another sip. And if it's worth finishing, I'll finish.
Whoa.
But some espressos aren't worth finishing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Those ones that are not worth finishing, what makes you go, nah, I'm not going to finish this? Is
It doesn't have the right balance. It needs that balance. The sweet acidity, all of it.
You had mentioned when you started on the espresso machine, started working in that, and then you started kind of growing into wanting to network and like working, building relationships within coffee in the industry. What did that look like for you at first when you started to kind of grow your network within the industry?
Growing my network actually really severely happened after I won the Caravan Showdown. And the prize for that was going to the barista school. Yeah. And going to trade shows and stuff is awesome. And I love everyone I meet there, but not everyone is like based in Portland. And so one thing that the barista school really helped me with was I met a lot of like Portland people that are based here, and people that I really got to like network with that are now some of my closest friends who were my teachers when I was going. And a lot of them, saw my potential with, what I wanted to do with coffee. They saw my excitement with coffee, and they actually took me under their wing and said, try this opportunity, try that opportunity. And, when I started to like branch out and try to do different things instead of just doing it on my own or finding some ad online saying this place is hiring, they're like, hey, this place is hiring. You have great potential. Yeah. Let me help you. And like the help from the community that I already, like I networked through that has like really helped me grow into what I'm doing today.
I think that's really cool because I tend to think that people in coffee are all really good people. And it's just a matter of getting to know those people. And there is so much, I don't know, there's so many people who know something that can offer that. I think that's an awesome way to approach it. Like you were saying, like all of a sudden you start meeting people and you start learning about things through people and getting into different places where you wouldn't normally maybe get to through, like a ad online. What was one of the most, like as you were starting to grow that network, what was one of the most exciting moments?
Actually, one of the biggest growing moments was right after I went through the school, the first Golden Bean happened.
Yeah.
And they were looking for volunteers. And
could you tell us what a golden bean is? Because I thought they were brown for a start, but you're saying they're golden?
Those are those really light beans you find in the roast that you like.
One of those golden beans.
You just throw over your shoulder.
I know what you mean now. Carry on.
Golden Bean is a really cool international roasting competition. There's Australia branch that's been going on for 11 years now, and 4 years in Portland. I met them as I went through the school, and then I ended up volunteering for them. But with volunteering for them, instead of these connections that I made of teachers and like owners of this and this and this, we're all actually coming together and working together in this engine room to produce all of these espressos. And, there's hundreds of espressos, and we're like trying to like create all these with like milk base and decaf and franchise. We're trying to create all of these things, but we're working together. And then with working together with that and the amount of judges that are around, those are all coffee people too. And that's just a huge networking thing. And it just like, I don't know, that part like really opened up my coffee career, like meeting all these people and getting to like work with them instead of just like learning from them. We learned from each other, which was really cool.
How many coffee drinks would you make in a day in the engine room? Roundabout. I mean,
roundabout. Typically, there's about like 4 to 6 baristas and 100 to 200 coffees a day. Like it varies on the year and the entries and what category we're working on. Like everything varies, but everyone's just in there cranking out. We all have certain parameters we're supposed to be by. We're all there helping each other out. We also have runners making sure that we're like getting our next coffees that are ready to go. We have, all the machine guys there, the guys that like supply the grinders, the guys that supply the espresso machines. They're all standing there. So if one little thing goes hiccup, like someone's there to fix it, and like we're still cranking it out, and like it's just like this huge like engine room,
right?
Well, right.
It makes me think of like when you see like races and cars going to like the pits to like get the tires changed or whatever. It's like there's all people there just ready to or whatever they won't change the tires on a coffee machine.
Yeah.
So day 1 and day 4 or 3. I guess, did it feel like pulling shots, like you got better at it just by doing so many in a concentrated amount of time, or?
Oh, of course. Like, going into it my first year, like I had just learned to dial in coffee, like after the competition and stuff, like, I'm just like, oh, I know how to dial in, I think. And then by the end of day 3, my first year doing it, I had dialed in like, I don't know, 50, 60 espressos. I'm like, I got this. Like, I can dial it all in.
Wow. Going to, like, today, like you were saying, you open at Elevator at 6 a.m. So if anyone's getting their early morning coffee, go to Elevator. Yeah. But do you feel like you can dial things in quicker because of experiences like that?
It's the confidence level that really helped. Yeah, I can dial in coffee, and I'm like, I taste it, and I know my balance. I know what I'm looking for. And especially with all the different coffees that Elevator offers. Like, I know because I help roast and production and cup with all those coffees. Like, I know where they're supposed to be. So I can dial in a little bit quicker than, I don't know, like...
Me.
It's interesting what you just said there about Elevator. You can dial in shots, but then you roast as well, which you may get into in a moment. But it makes me realize that I always think of the barista can change what the roaster's done, what the farmer before the roaster has done so much, and the roaster can change things what the farmer done, and the farmer starts the whole process off. Is it sort of a mix there of balance of who's tweaking drinks more than others, or do you think perhaps the barista has the most power to change a drink that the roaster's intended or the farmer's intended? There's sort of like a whole network of people just there of the process.
It's a huge network too. We look at the notes of what our green bean suppliers like to say about the coffees. Like when you buy the coffee, you buy it because the way you sample roast it and tasted it, and then you roast it to your profile, which is great. But I'll dial in the coffee, and then later in the afternoon, I'll have one of my other baristas on bar, and they'll dial it into more of what they think it should taste like. Yes. And nobody's wrong.
Right.
Nobody's wrong. And we all talk about, like, especially if someone redials in, we all try the espresso together, talk about why we prefer it this way over this way. And we all just kind of come up with a group collection of why it's good and what it's good. But coffee is such a subjective thing anyway. So I do kind of like that my baristas have a different taste than I do, because then we can talk about why they prefer this to this and why I prefer this to that, Yeah.
You mentioned like subjectivity and objectivity. Do you find, are there coffees that you work with that you don't necessarily, they're not like your favorite, but you can appreciate that they're like a good coffee, but it may not be what you go for? And how do you stay objective if you are working with something like that?
I'm really not one for Kenyan coffees.
Yeah.
I did taste a Kenyan coffee today. That was really well balanced. It was totally awesome. It did have that like Kenyan-ness to it that I'm always like kind of like shunned upon for, but it was really well balanced. And so that's like kind of like the subjective thing is like, yeah, there can be a coffee that I'm not necessarily for, but someone can redial it in or brew it in a different way and bring out a certain sweetness. And it's just like, I'll still taste it and taste what I don't like about Kenyans, but still appreciate how good they brewed it and how they roasted it.
Some coffees lend themselves more to the espresso style than other coffees do, and vice versa. They can do better other ways. Do you think that's true? Like some coffees are just not made for espresso, or this coffee is definitely made for an espresso?
I think at that point, it all comes down to the roast. Some coffees, when they're roasted a little bit lighter, I feel like aren't going to make the best espresso. Like a lot of like Brazils and Mexico and like all that. Like if they're a little bit on the lighter side, they're not going to come forward in their espresso, and they're going to be really acidic and just like really bright. Yeah. But if you take it a little bit farther and even with those ones, you blend them a little bit with something else, like they're not bad and they do have the potential to do that. But just by themselves, like, it does depend on the roast style.
When you're looking for balance in a coffee, what type of balance are you looking for? Like, are you looking for more acidity, more body? Like, what does a balanced coffee mean for you?
For me, I always look for a good body with sweetness. Like, I always look for that sweetness in coffee. Juicier coffees like Perus and stuff like are more like my style. I did have this one, what was it? It was a Rwanda coffee in Sydney when I was down in Australia. It was the best espresso I ever had. Whoa. It was the sweetest espresso I ever had. And I didn't ask the guy what it was when he served it to me, and I was drinking it because this was one of the best cafes in Sydney. So I went there. I was like, don't tell me anything. I just want an espresso. It was the best espresso I ever had. And it was Rwanda. I was like, whoa. And I totally got another one.
So you went from espresso, and you're still in espresso, but to roasting as well. What made you want to do roasting as well? Or, what brought that transition or addition?
What brought the transition of going from barista to roaster, or at least getting into the roasting side, was even as a barista to this day, like, I don't know everything. I think I do, but I don't. But just like with any job, you need that continued education to get that continued like challenge to keep your interest at peak. So I was just like, okay, so I'm a good barista. Now I'm going to learn how to roast. Now I'm going to learn how to do production. Now I'm going to learn how to do everything else. Wow. Because I don't want to quit coffee, but I needed to keep going. And so the way to keep going is learning something new. And so, well, I know how to brew it. I should learn how to roast it.
What was the most exciting thing about doing the barista side of it after doing roasting as well? Like, was there obviously it's all coffee, but was there like any kind of bleed over of like, oh man, I learned this about the roasting, and now when I make it, I think of this, and it would just kind of like tied together?
Totally. Yeah. It's more for when you throw it on the cupping table for production. And you stare at those cups, and especially when you're a new roaster, like I'm sure you've experienced this, it just breaks before it's supposed to break. And you're like, oh, it's underdeveloped. What did I do? Like, where did I go wrong? And then it's going back and looking at the profiles and seeing like, oh, that flare up, I should have done something about that. Or, like, oh, the air temperature was wonky this time. Maybe I should like do something with the air control, like it's kind of just like with dialing in coffee, all those little tweaks along the way make a difference. Do you ever find either tweaking a roast because of how you tasted it, or tweaking a like drink because of the way you roasted it? Does one side affect the other? Probably a little bit. I'm still like only in year 2 of roasting, so like I'm still trying to figure everything out. But I mean, it does come down to like what I was saying about the cups breaking. Like, it breaks in the cup while it's on your cupping table, and you're like, well, I have 20 pounds of that. Now I need to figure out what to do with it. And so you throw it in a batch where you see how it tastes. You throw it in the espresso machine, see how it tastes. And like, sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it's okay. Yeah. What's more stressful, roasting or being a barista? Or are they different?
I mean, obviously they're different, but
Oh, there's stresses to both sides.
yeah. Well, like you mentioned, like roasting something, and it's like if it doesn't turn out the way you want it or something, is that stressful, or is it having a line out the door, or like
that would be stressful to me.
When a roast goes wrong, it's really stressful. I think like the most stressful time that's ever happened in the roastery with me was one of the first times where I was supposed to roast all by myself because our other roasting guy was out of town.
yeah,
And I was like, okay, I can do this. And like we had practiced the profiles together weeks before, and we had practiced this, and this. And I was like, okay, cool. I got 4 batches. I'm not going to mess any of this up.
yeah.
And I have a batch going, and it's been in the roaster for like 4 minutes now. It's starting to like yellow. And something in my brain said, oh, open the trap. And I dumped another batch of green right on top of that. I was just like, that's like 34 pounds of coffee that I have to dump and throw away and start over with. That's an expensive mistake.
Oh, yeah, true.
And that's where my brain went. I was like, oh my God, that's so much money.
Right.
Oops.
I guess as a barista, you can make a few more mistakes that are not as expensive. Then I go the other way and go, if the farmer makes a mistake, that's a whole year of his just gone. Suddenly he doesn't do it right. I think, wow, okay. You learn from that and you grow in that. And now I doubt you've done that again. Hopefully you're not.
No, not at all.
I think sometimes it's those things that probably wouldn't have been something you would have thought about until after doing it. Now you're like, oh, I now think about that. It's not ever a thing. You know, it's like sometimes those can be some of the most helpful learning experiences. Of like,
It's really neat that you've done barista, you've done roasting. Not everyone has that opportunity to do both of those and get the feel for both of them. I don't know the answer to this question, but have you ever been to a farm? I was talking about a farm. Have you been to a farm? Do you want to go to a farm to get that third piece of the puzzle sort of?
Oh, I do.
You do?
I do. I really want to go.
Are there parts that you go, and I think there is from all of us, is I'd really like to go to, I've heard you use the word Peru, I've heard you use the word Kenya. Is there a place where they are growing coffee that you say, I'd really like to try that one? If I had an opportunity, that would be where I'd go.
Oh, I'd love to go to Guatemala.
Guatemala. That's not too far away.
Yeah, I've been really into all the Guatemalas we've been getting like the past 2 years. We had this Pacamara from Terra Negra that was just juicy and just sweet and delicious. And we used the Guatemala La Jolla from Terra Negra as well, and that also like placed in Golden Bean this year. Which I actually got to roast.
There you go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I guess like right now I'm a little biased towards Guatemala.
That's all right. Yeah.
I would I'd go anywhere, but Guatemala is kind of like top of the list right now.
what keeps you in the coffee industry?
I'm kind of a perfectionist. That's just a personal thing of mine. And being a perfectionist, I want to know everything. And every time I think I don't know, peaked in my education of coffee, someone's like, oh, hey, did you hear about this? I'm like, well, what? So it's a continued education. Like, you know, like I learned everything as a barista, or I learned everything as a roaster. It's like, well, what's after roasting, and what's after this, and what's after this? And it's just going to be all of that continued education.
Yeah.
And especially now with like being a roaster, you almost taste coffee different. Like as a barista, you know, oh, it's this, it's this, it's this. And then roasting, you're like, oh, it's this and this and this. And then it's this, 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 and this. And you're like, and there's still more. So it's just like tasting all the coffees and like doing all these things and like watching, you know, America's Best Espresso and like what people enter. And you're like, well, that's not what I would necessarily buy. But if that's what's winning, like I want to taste it. And making all these friends and connections and like staying connected with them. And then another thing, too, is if you travel to a different state, you know, you've met all these people. Yeah. I get to finally come to your cafe. Yeah. You know, so it's like it makes a destination point to anywhere you go because it's everywhere.
Does coffee make it easier to travel? In the sense of like you had mentioned, like you meet people at SCA or you meet people at Golden Bean and stuff like that. And then you go somewhere and you're like, oh, you've got a coffee shop here. Does it make it easier to kind of like, I guess, are coffee people good people to travel around with?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, how do you find good coffee in a new place?
Ooh.
I totally go with the social media recommendation thing on Facebook. You meet so many people and you make these connections, and the way you like stay in contact with all these people is through social media.
Right.
You know, like I know
Yeah.
some people up in Vancouver, Canada that have cafes. I know people in Australia that have cafes.
Yeah.
And I don't get to see them, not at every trade show or every event or anything. But the power of the internet like keeps
Yeah.
everyone connected. So you go to these different places and you just go, hey, I'm here. Where do I go? And everyone from everywhere is like, try this place, you know?
Yeah.
So like power of the internet.
I've heard Australia mentioned a few times. Is that because of coffee you got to Australia, or you got there and you learned about coffee down there, or how did that come about?
It was working with Golden Bean.
Okay.
Sean and Christine
Okay.
opened up their house to me, and they offered me a job at their shop, Pete Coffee. And while I was working down there, I was mainly doing a lot of barista stuff, but then I became really close with the roaster, Angsley Harrison, and I was like, hey, I really want to learn how to roast. And he kind of took me under his wing when it was slow.
Right.
And he like taught me how to roast. He let me like start on the sample roaster. We did a lot of cuppings. And then they moved me on to Black Betty, which was this 30-kilo roaster that was huge. And he was like, there you go. And I'm like, this is a lot of coffee. Like, I don't want to mess it up. But it all turned out great. And he was there holding my hand the whole time. And that kind of started it. And also I got to, when I was down there, I got to work with Ann Cooper and her equilibrium roasting class. I went through that at Proud Mary's in Melbourne. So, you know,
Great,
kind
yeah.
of like the whole connection of everything. And like with those, without those two, like I wouldn't be roasting here, you know, because I came back to Elevator and I was like, hey, I'm back from Australia. I learned all this stuff. And they're like, okay, well, we're roasting now. So why don't you come over to the roasting side and still help out with the barista side? And so like, I'm just kind of the all around coffee person. The really funny thing about going down there is going from America to Australia as a barista. I'm talking to other baristas down there and I'm talking in Fahrenheit and they're talking in Celsius.
Metric, you're right.
And then I'm down there and I learned about roasting in Celsius and I come back to America and everyone's talking about Fahrenheit. So it's just like this like weird cross of
Interesting.
like figuring out what temperatures.
Yeah, you could go wrong that way. Yeah.
But everything just got crossed, just going back and forth. I was just like, ah.
So when you roast, do you use Celsius or Fahrenheit?
I use Fahrenheit.
Okay,
Makes sense.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it take to be a barista today, in your opinion?
To be a barista, you have to be motivated and willing, and you have to be open to learning like new things. You also have to have the right idea that coffee is subjective and that nobody's wrong and nobody's right. Yes, there's good and bad. You know, I have seen baristas get mad over someone saying this and they're not wrong. You need to calm down. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, you just have to be open to learn. And you have to be open to taste everything. Like, you can't say, oh, like, I heard that was a bad coffee, so I'm not going to taste it. Like,
Yeah.
to know good coffee, you have to taste bad coffee.
If you could go back in time and say to yourself one tip, what would be your biggest like takeaway, or like one thing you'd be like, hey, just remember this?
Oh, I'd tell myself to calm down. When I was a young little barista that thought I knew everything, like, I'd get mad over the smallest thing. Like, somebody would be like, oh, you can't stir like that. You have to understand where you work, whether you think it's wrong or right. You need to follow those protocols.
Yeah.
And following those protocols from shop to shop to shop to place that you work, like, everyone's protocol is going to be different. And you can learn along the
Right.
way, but it's like calming down,
Yeah.
realizing it's subjective, and that what you're doing is not wrong. I wish if I would go back, I would tell myself, calm down, you're not wrong, they're not wrong, calm down.
Well, what are you excited about right at the moment, and I guess what in the now? What are you into, or what are you up to on your daily coffee journey?
A little bit of everything. Right now, I'm trying to survive just as a, young 20 some odd whatever person living in the city for my first time by myself. I work a lot of jobs and it keeps me really busy to the point of where some months I have, 1 weekend day off a month, or I have 1 day off a month. But everything I do is really different. It keeps that continued education going. It keeps me traveling, and it keeps me excited because, like, I also, like, I work with a machine company, Rancilio, and I get to travel with them to trade shows and stuff and, like, help make coffee for them. I also work with, like, Pacific Foods, helping them develop the alternative plant-based products for baristas, the whole barista series, which is a lot of fun because, like, you get to go into the food lab, talk to the scientists, do, like, quality controls to them, and it's a whole panel of baristas. There's baristas from all over, like, all the cafes around Portland, and so that's fun. And then especially with, like, Elevator, I'm, like, a barista roaster production. I do deliveries, you know, I get to, like, visit our wholesale accounts, make sure everything's going good. And then, of course, I also work with Buckman, cleaning the roaster, which when you clean the roaster, you get to take it apart, and then something, of course, goes wrong, and then you have to learn how to fix it, and then you learn about how the roaster works. And, you know, it's just, there's all these little bits that create these little bits of education that keep me really busy, but it's in so many different spectrums in the same industry.
And do you find that, like, for you, education is best, like, immersion or, like, study, or is, like how do you find the balance as far as that education goes? Is it...
I'm just personally, I'm a 100% hands-on learner. I read coffee books all the time, but you can only read so much. Like, they're like, oh, you got to turn this screw. What screw is that?
You can only read so much about the flavor of something.
Yeah.
Without tasting it, though, you don't really have the experience of it.
Oh, yeah. Like, the first espresso competition I ever saw when I first started coffee at my first SCA thing, I was, like, sitting there watching it, and the judge was like, oh, it tastes like oranges and tobacco. And I'm like, I need to taste that. Like, what are you talking about?
How can people keep up with everything that you're doing? What's the best way for people to stay connected?
I guess I post on my Instagram a lot. Yeah, I try to keep up with my Insta story and whatnot. I always go live with our quality control cuppings at Elevator. Mm-hmm. So nice. Every Wednesday in the afternoon, like, I go live with our cuppings and
wow.
Yeah. And I always encourage, because we do it in the middle of our cafe because we don't have any private space there. We just have this table right off our bar where we do our quality control. And we always encourage, like, other offices in the building to come join us. We encourage our customers to come join us. Wow. Sometimes we get takers, sometimes we don't, which is fine. Yeah. And sometimes they are private depending on, like, if we're, like, picking out, like, a new coffee, if it's, like, we're doing samples or something. Right. But we always encourage everyone to come join us just so they can learn too.
I am absolutely impressed with how much number one you're doing. How much you know about it. It's just awesome. Thank you for coming on our little show.
Well, thanks for having me.
And thank you for doing all that you do. I think that there's so much there that adds to not just what you're doing, but also to what everybody else is doing. Mm-hmm, I think that's really awesome. And I think your attitude towards just being willing to jump in and clean roasters, or you know, going to Australia and learning to roast in kilos and Celsius.
One day that will all be metric. We're close.
It will make it easier. I can count to 10.
That's good. And I would say I've known Cole for a while, and that attitude comes through you very strongly. I've always been impressed by it, and you are willing to do things that some say, oh no, I'm just going to be a barista, I'm just going to stick here and that's what I do, and get bored, whatever they do. But you've shown that not just barista, you've done competitions, you're working behind the scenes, you're working cleaning roasters. If you can clean a roaster, that's one of the hardest jobs out there. Or cupping, if you do the dishes for cupping, which no one sees. It's like, if you're willing to do all those things, it says a lot about you and where you're going, what